There it is. All right. Well, first I want to thank everyone for joining me on this Saturday morning, afternoon, Saturday, wherever you are. I'm hoping in the course of these couple of hours that I at least give you something that you never heard of before, that something I talk about is new for you, or some connection that I offer is something that you hadn't thought about before. But most of all, I really hope that I inspire you to really think for yourself about the things that I've said and try to live into the experience of the young child. That really is the most important thing that any of us can do if we are surrounding ourselves with young children in our lives. So just to dive in, I would just like to say that for me, always the fundamental question in any consideration is, what is the human being? So what is really the essence of human being or of humanness? And for me, the essence really is that we have the potential for connecting, that we can, in our thinking, make connections between things that don't seem that they have a connection, that in our soul life, we can feel a connection with other human beings. We can feel the connection with the world around us, with the nature that is around us, the stars and planets and the kingdoms of the earth, and also in whatever way you imagine it, that we can feel a connection to the spiritual beings. And to me, that's sort of the core of my thinking about the human being, and it's the core of the path of becoming human. And I often talk about this idea of becoming human. And I kind of wish that instead of us being called human beings, that we were called human becomings. Let me just adjust a little there. One thing I want to bring you, actually, I want to bring today a look at the young child in relation to these 5 principles that I think about. And these 5 principles really guide me in all of my work with the young children, in my kindergarten life and in my life with my own grandchildren. My own children are adults, but my grandchildren and the other children of my life outside of school life, these things really guide me into as a compass to help me navigate the best way to connect with the children and the best ways to support their development. I should say, for those of you who don't know me, I've been a kindergarten teacher since the late 80s. I have 3 grown-up children. I have grandchildren. I've been a Waldorf teacher for 30 plus years, always in the kindergarten at the Santa Cruz Waldorf School. I've done teacher trainings in many, many places in the US, a little bit in Europe, and a lot in Asia, in China, in Malaysia, and in Indonesia. I've written a few books. I have a blog. I've used to be the editor of the Waldorf Early Childhood Association magazine called Gateways. So I've been around the block of Waldorf Early Childhood, and I like to think about things. I like to make connection in my thinking to really understand things. So first things that I want to talk about, I want to show you something, if I still have it here. So first I wanted to show you this clever little diagram that I made that has these 5 principles, these 5 compass points for me. One of them is understanding the neurological development of the child. One of them is really understanding how this experience of self that all of us have in our little Zoom boxes or in our physical bodies, wherever we are in the world, as an adult, we really have a strong experience of self. We know where our boundaries of our self lie. But for the young children, it's not quite the same, and it's something that develops in them over time. So I like to think about that. Where are they? Where is a child in this spectrum of development of the experience of self? I really focus on, if I want a young child to learn something, how can I offer it to them in such a way that they're likely to imitate it, to really really activate this principle of imitation. So how can I be an example for the children? The easy way to go as an adult is to be an instructor or an explainer, but that, as I'll be talking about, that is not a supportive way for you to try to get a young child to learn something new or to change something. It's probably also not going to be a successful technique. And finally, or not finally, if someone is to learn something of any age, their will has to be activated. For you to learn something, your own will has to be engaged in the activity. All learning for anyone of any age is an activity of the will. And as we'll talk about a little bit this morning, the young child is primarily functioning in the sphere of the will, not so much in their thinking. And yes, they have feelings, but their feelings aren't not penetrated by much thought. And finally, to really consider how are the life forces involved in this, and maybe even what are life forces. I think that's an important thing to think about. For those of you who are listening in who've been readers of Rudolf Steiner lectures and books, you probably have a sense that the understanding of life forces and understanding what the will is are very important as it relates to human development, and as it relates to children, and as it relates to early childhood. So the will and the life forces are super important things for us to understand, and yet they seem like the most elusive, the most complicated and mysterious subjects of all. So I'd like to try to demystify that, so that we can understand how important those forces are, the will forces and the life forces in the young child, but also that we begin to have a sense for what that is. I could put this, whoopsie, sorry. Where'd it go? Here we go. I can put this, stop the share, and I'm going to put in the chat a place where you can have that that little chart, and there's another chart below it of something we'll be talking about later this morning, which has to do with the brain. So let us move on. The basics. Let's think about the basics. What is a human being? What are we? I read this really interesting thing once from a novel that I love. As a tangent, I should just mention, I think it's important that we all read novels, or that we all do things not related to our work as early childhood educators or as parents, it's so easy to be devoured by those things. And yet, if we don't nurture ourselves a little bit and find joy in the things that bring us joy, then the children suffer. So I found this in a novel, a very fun novel by a man named Terry Pratchett. And he described the human being in this way: we appeared on the back of a rat that grew out of a lizard. That can sound a little strange, perhaps, but it's actually completely true, and not very much metaphorical even, because our neurology is something that has been evolving for millions of years. And the first creatures that had a brain, the lizards or the reptiles millions of years ago, had a certain kind of a brain. And as life on Earth evolved, mammals evolved out of lizards, and the mammals had an additional feature of their brain. There was an additional sort of functioning system that mammals had that lizards didn't have. And as evolution continued, as brain evolved, as species evolved, eventually there became humans. And the human brain is something that evolved out of the rat brain, you could say. The human brain has additional features that rat brains don't have. So we did appear on the back of a rat that grew out of a lizard. So that's from a physiological, neurological point of view, and I'd really like to go into that in depth in a couple of minutes. But first, I would like to just do an overview of how Steiner thought about the human being, which resonates very deeply for me, that we have these four main features, these four main functioning systems, you could say, or Steiner called them four bodies of the human being. And the first body is the obvious one. We have a physical body, and you can see it, and you can feel it and touch it. And if all we had was a physical body, we would be corpses. There's something additional to the physical body that allows it to resist gravity, that allows it to you could say connect to levity as opposed to gravity. And it has something that creates the possibility for it to move. And this is the realm of life forces. And other traditions have other names for that functional part of the human being. I like the word life forces. Ancient Chinese tradition used the word qi. In ancient India, or even in modern Hindu, word for it is prana. Steiner liked the word ether body. Whatever word you like to use, there's this part of the human being that enlivens us, that allows movement to be possible, that allows the fluids, or that creates the fluid movement in our body, that enlivens us, that resists invading viruses and bacteria, that connected to it is the good bacteria, and our digestive system is a big part of this system. But it's an invisible thing, actually. It surrounds us and it penetrates us, these life forces. There's an additional part of the human being, which the word I like to use is soul. Steiner used the word soul, or sometimes astral body, and it has to do with the things that attract us and the things that repel us. So the things that we're drawn to, the things that we don't want to go near, the things we like, the things we don't like, the realm of our feelings and the realm of our thinking, or especially the patterns of our thinking. And it has to do with how we process our sense experiences and then how we respond to them. And finally, we have another part of the human being, which you could think of as the spirit, or the core part of you, or your higher self. Steiner liked the challenging word ego for this. And of course, many people, when they think ego, think how it's used in Eastern spiritual tradition as something that is a problem and something that has to be overcome. So I prefer to use the word spirit as meaning that higher part of us that is the driving force in our development, in our evolution, that we barely connect with, that we have hardly a connection to in our lifetime. Every once in a while we get a glimpse of its functioning, but it's always busy. And it comes from this place where I like to think of it as a world of pure warmth and pure joy. That's where we really live. But when we are born, we enter the physical world. And in the physical world is where we have our physical body, and we are enlivened by life forces, and we have our soul, our sort of habits, our patterns that are there for us to discover and to overcome. But when we go to sleep, or before we're born, we're in this land of just pure warmth and joy. And that's who we really are. And as a human being on earth, it's as if we've gone to school. We have all of our challenges to overcome, all of our patterns, all of our shadow nature, all of our reaction, all of our attachment and our suffering only is in the physical world of our life on earth. And it's as if it's a schooling for the spiritual part of us to overcome these sufferings and attachments and patterns, so that we can become a better and better human being over the course of our lifetime. And if you think that it's true, over the course of your lifetimes. So that's one aspect of the human being, one of the basics. Another piece of being human is that we have several ways that we can interact with the world around us. We can have thoughts about the world around us. That's what we grown-ups do a lot of. We think about stuff. And the experiences that we have, whether they're inner or outer experiences, can elicit feelings in us. And feelings run the whole spectrum, from really great and wonderful feelings to really yucky and uncomfortable, not feeling good stuff. But all of those feelings are kind of their own part of the human being and how we interact with the world. And we have another possibility, another faculty of being human, is that we can do things. We can take hold of our experience and do something with it. We can decide to think about a certain thing. We can go over and pick up a thing. We can push someone aside. We can help someone who's injured. All of those actions are activities of our will. So we only have those three ways of interacting with the world. Once we've had a perception, we can either think about it, we can have feelings, or we can do an activity. We can have our will be engaged. So those three parts of the human being, our thinking and our feeling and our willing, are separate systems that definitely interact with each other. And as I mentioned, adults mostly function in the realm of thinking. Of course, we're doers and we have feelings too, but we function far more in the thinking than a young child does. And a young child functions primarily in the will. They take hold of the world by doing things, starting when they're a very little child, by sticking things in their mouths, to picking things up, feeling things, throwing things down. That's how they take hold of the world, not by thinking about it and understanding it, but by just doing stuff. So that is a piece of all of this piece of what a human being is. Now, as a human being, and we have these 4 different parts of us, these 4 different bodies, as I mentioned, there's something really interesting. And it's that within me, or within each of us, the bodies that we have, our spiritual part and our soul and our life forces and our physical body, there's a kind of a relationship, a sort of an education relationship that they have. So our physical body is really formed, you could say, educated, honed, sculpted by our life forces. And our life forces within ourselves, our life forces are very much under the influence of our soul. If you have a soul issue, it can cause a blockage from your life forces being able to nourish your physical body. In fact, a lot of sort of complementary medicine practitioners or integrative doctors talk about how the physical symptoms are like the last stop on the train, but where illness usually begins is in the soul. A dysfunction in one's soul influences the etheric forces being able to enrich the body, and therefore we end up with various kinds of illnesses. And then from sort of this very invisible sphere, our spirit, that higher part of ourself, is really trying to enter into physical life. And you could say that's the whole path of being a human being, that your spirit is trying to fully enter into the physical world. And it's a lifelong process. And for those of you who are Waldorf teachers, and if you've ever done a child study, and people say at the child study, oh, the problem is this child is having incarnation difficulties. And whenever someone says that, it always makes me laugh, because every single one of us has incarnational difficulties. That's the whole point. The whole point is this struggle to fully incarnate, the struggle for our soul to really welcome the spiritual part of us and live together happily ever after in this lifetime. And that is always our challenge. That's what going to school as a human being in the non-spiritual world means. That's the path of becoming a human being. Part of it is we have to develop the capacities to breathe. We have to learn how to breathe in and breathe out, and not just physically. We have to learn how to sleep and dream. We have to learn how to be focused on things and relax about things. We have to learn about balance. Another word for breathing is balance. We have to balance the fun with the serious effort. And if, how does that saying go? All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. And that's absolutely true. And it's part of our path of becoming human. And it's how also we have to accompany and guide and support the young children in this, by making sure that for them, it's not all too serious, nor all too silly and fun. So when the children are very young, it's as if they are living in the life forces of those around them, the adults around them. I think this is a really important thing to think about. And anyone who ever was a new kindergarten teacher has a visceral experience of this. Because probably before you were a kindergarten teacher, you had other jobs. And in doing those other jobs, you did your job and then you went home and you did whatever else you do. And some of us had jobs that were, hard labor type jobs. One of my jobs I used to do, I worked at a bakery. I was the dough maker. And so I spent the day picking up 80-pound bags of flour and putting them in the giant mixer and, lifting. It was like my job was weightlifting. And I would go home, I would, eat dinner and would be ready to go out and do other things. And a few short years later, I wasn't very much older, so no, it's not about age. A few short years later, I became a kindergarten teacher. And for the first months, I would go to kindergarten. I'd be there from 8:30 to 1 o'clock. I would go home and I would be so wiped out. I would have no energy. And it took me years to understand what was happening. And what was happening was the young children devour our etheric forces. They devour our life forces because it takes some number of years for them to develop like their own body of life forces. And when they're very young, they are riding on the life forces of those around them and of the earth itself. And until until they've reached a certain ripening of their early childhood years, which culminates, you could say, with the birth of their own life forces body, their own etheric body, until then, they are really like little vampires or leeches on the life forces around them. And even into first grade, I bet if those of you who are connected to schools, you can watch a new first grade teacher almost always get sick in the fall. Late October, you can almost bet that the new first grade teacher is going to get sick, and not just like a cold, but they're going to get some sort of a something that's going to wipe them out and make them stay at home. And that's because they didn't think about this. So there are ways to protect your life forces and not deprive the children of them, but to nurture your own. And that's a subject for another time. But just to say that the children are developing their own body of life forces, and it takes time, and it really sort of ripens around the time of the transition from kindergarten to first grade. In fact, you could say that's what you're waiting to see. Before someone goes to first grade, you want to see that they have developed their own life forces. So one thing I think is really important and often not considered when we think about young children, and it has to do with the way their consciousness is developing, the way their relationship of self and world is developing. And I think if we put that in front of us, and when we look at the children and have to determine what do we do now because something has happened or something hasn't happened, that we want there to be a different response, outcome, behavior, we have to think about where is the consciousness of this young child? Where is their experience of self on the spectrum of its development? For instance, well, let's just go from the beginning. When a baby is born, I would say they have zero awareness of self, that their experience is only experience. All of the sense experience that they have is just like, it's like living in a sea of experience without having a thinking mind. And for an adult, it's nearly impossible to imagine yourself into that situation, or to imagine what that would be like, because adults have words and have thinking, and to separate that away and to try to live into just experience, just percepts with no concepts, only sense experience. And yet that's the experience of the newborn child. They don't separate into this is self and this is other. So a newborn child being held, let's say, they've just nursed and they're being held. And we like to think that they're looking up at us and having this kind of warm and cozy thought, oh, mommy or daddy is holding me, and I feel good about that. And that's not what's happening with the newborn. The newborn, and I don't know how I can explain it. I've tried for years, because the only way I can explain things is with words, and words don't really apply. But if you could imagine as the newborn child in the arms, and so the newborn child has just nursed, there's a warm feeling. So they're experiencing warmth, and the warmth is coming from the inside because the milk was warm. That's now inside their belly. They're being held, and there's a kind of another kind of warmth involved, the soul warmth of the adult holding the baby. And babies are designed, literally designed, to be cute, so that we are stimulated, our cuteness sense organ or something is stimulated to offer love and warmth to this cute being. So they feel that. They don't know what it is, but they feel it. They feel the warmth that we're giving them. Plus, it's our own child. And so there's something warm and cozy about, oh, it's our baby. So there's this warmth that we're giving the child. There's a physical warmth, there's a soul warmth, there's a feeling of not being hungry. And that's a good feeling for the infant. But there's not a feeling in the infant of, oh, that's mommy, and mommy's holding me. And this feeling of selfness takes a while to develop. And how it develops is through feelings of discomfort. It's kind of weird in a way. The first things that we start to notice and start to have a glimmering of this self that we are on the road to be is when we are hungry, or when we are cold, or when we are having trouble digesting what we ate. And you know that from the outside people say you're colicky, but from the inside you just feel yucky. And so when there's something that our organs are telling us, our Steiner called it the sense of life. When our sense of life is being stimulated in such a way that something is off, something isn't right with us, that's when we first get a glimpse of that it's us. Something is not right, and we need to get something to eat, or we need just something, or we need someone to know we don't feel good, so we just are going to grumble about it. And this it's in science they call this interoception. It's a ability, or it's the sensing apparatus for knowing what's going on with your organs. And it's the first thing that stimulates this this seed of self. I'm a self, and you're not part of me. So first we get these feelings of discomfort, and as time goes on, um, we start to develop language slowly, beginnings of language. We start to develop movement, and we can start to move on our own. And as we start to move on our own, we move away. Often we're moving away from the parent, away from the adults who are caring for us. And as when we can stand up, we walk away from them. And these are big things towards this experience of self. I'm walking away from you. Or really, when they're little, it's not I'm walking away from you. It's Stevie walking away from you. Stevie walking away from mommy. Little by little, we start by calling ourselves by our own name, and then we start, usually in English, we start saying me want, me do, me this, me that, and eventually 2-3 years old we start calling ourselves I. And that's a big step towards this experiencing self as self, but it's not the end. It's totally not the end of the road. It's just a part. It's just it's not even really a milestone, but it's a part of this path towards self. When the child is a little bit older, they start to realize that the things that they're dreaming aren't real life, that dreaming is dreaming and being awake is being awake. And that doesn't come until they're 6, 7, 8 years old. 8, 9 years old, there's this experience that the thoughts that the 9-year-old has is not available to their parents. So the things that go on in the inner life of the 9-year-old, the 9-year-old finally really gets it that no one else has access to their inner life. That's part of the 9-year-old change. It's a freeing, in a way, to have your own inner life, but it's also a little bit of a lonely experience because, oh, I'm all alone here in my inner life. But that's still just part of this journey. It's not the end of the journey of self and other. I mean, surely if you're with a kindergartner, you could point to another child and you can ask your kindergartner, is that other child you? And they'll say no. But another part of them has this experience of we're kind of this group. We're all together. And yes, I'm me, and that's this child and that child, but there's something very much group consciousness in the young child still. And as we get older and older, you look at the teenager. Teenagers are famous for pushing away from their parents. It continues into early adulthood when your parents wanted you to be a doctor and you wanted to be a kindergarten teacher, and that was a challenge, but you pushed away from what they wanted and you were able to choose to do what you wanted. Not everybody is able to do that, actually, but it's all part of your discovery of this experience in the world, in this physical earthly world that we live in, that I am a self and what isn't part of me is other. And this is something that continues, and it continues really strongly into our 30s, into our adulthood, when we have this kind of like the experience of the 9-year-old, only more. We are fully aware of the boundaries of our own self. And we're also fully aware of this experience, or many people have this experience, that it is a really lonely and isolating experience as an adult, that nobody fully gets you. Nobody really listens in and knows who you really are. And you can be married and you can have a close family and you can have colleagues, and yet you can still have this experience of being lonely in the world that from the outside looks like, how could you be lonely? But it's because it's an inner experience. You are fully self, and it doesn't feel that good to be so separated. Now, part of this experience of separation that this experience of self is delivering to us, it goes hand in hand with a part of our thinking that is developing, because the newborn baby has no intellect. You know, you could, if you think about what the intellect does, our intellect functions as a something that makes everything else an object of its activity. So your thinking objectivizes everything so that it can look at it, it can think about it, it can consider it, it can weigh it, it can analyze it, it can label it, it can categorize it, and then it can be done with it. That's what your intellect wants to do. But your intellect can't become it. Your intellect can't join you with something. Your intellect only functions by separating you from the thing so you can think about whatever it is. So that as your intellect develops, it's based in your developing neurology, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. As your intellect develops, it's hand in hand with your self-developing, which is an experience of separating you from the world. The newborn infant is completely 100% engaged, connected with all aspects of their experience. But the more our intellect develops and the more our self experience develops, the more our experiencing the world through the lens of self and other develops, the more we're separate. And this is, you could say, this is the core human challenge, that we're born with this total connection. In fact, even before we're born, we come from this place where everything is warmth and joy, and all of the beings that reside there are fully connected with each other. It's like they interpenetrate each other. And then we're born into a physical body, and at first we still feel the connection to everything around us through our senses, because we don't have this thinking capacity of the intellect that is part of what separates us. So that the path of being a human being is to be born with full connection to all that is around you. All is one, to being separate from the world around you. And then often people decide that this is not a pleasant experience. And so they want to do something to regain that feeling of connection, to regain that experience that the young child has. So that's part of the path of human being, that we're shown a glimpse of connection, of full and utter connection. And then through our own natural development, that goes away, but we're left with a seed memory of it. And then through our own activity, we can regain that experience of connection. And then when we regain it, it feels even better because we attained it through our own will activity. It wasn't something that was given to us like it was at birth. It was something that we had to work to get to. So I think that's a very important part of human development, that we start out with this, you could call it mono consciousness, this consciousness of the oneness of it all. And then we begin to wake up to this separation of self and other. And a lot of people call early childhood a time of dream consciousness. It's like we're walking around in a dream. And it's not only because children are very imaginative, young children are imaginative, and they tend to seem like they're in a fantasy land. That's part of it. But the other part of this dream consciousness experience is they're not fully awake to this human experience of selfness. And as an adult, we reach that experience of selfness, but it comes along with the downside, which is the self experience also is a separateness and isolation experience. So we are very awake as adults to the experience of self, And it's a spectrum from birth, where we're completely asleep to that experience, to adults where we're completely awake to that experience. And we have to, when we're thinking about young children, we have to look at where are they on that spectrum. You know, a 2-year-old is different than a 5-year-old, but to really look with open eyes and open mind and try to determine where this young child is. And the one reason it's important, and I don't think there's time to talk about it in depth today, but it's important when, for instance, a child does something that you wish they hadn't done, and um, you want to help them be doing something different in a future moment like this. And so you look right in the child's eyes, and you already have this feeling in you that something didn't go the way you wanted, and maybe even you have this thought that was wrong, you don't, you know, that's not appropriate, or those kinds of thoughts that we humans tend to have. And you want your child to look you in the eyes when you're telling him about this stuff. That is really almost painful for the child, because you are fully awake to self. And there's a kind of a power that you carry being fully awake to self. And the young child is not so awake to self. So your self meeting their sort of dream consciousness is very overwhelming at best. So that's why we have to think about these things, to look at how best to engage with the children in various situations, recognizing that there's different things going on, that we have to navigate these different things. And so this is one of those things, is understanding the development of the sense of self. And the sense of self, you know, there's so many angles you can think about how this develops. One way it develops, as I mentioned, is as the intellect develops, it is in itself something which separates us from what is around us. Another way you can think about it is as the senses develop, and as the senses have different experiences, that starts to send to our central nervous system these different sensations that begin to give a picture to the developing neurology of the child, that this is what defines me. Especially touch, things that we touch shows us the boundary of our skin. Things that we hear, we can recognize those as being not only not me, but actually something inner in someone or something else when we hear sounds. So our senses are part of what delivers this experience of self. So I would like to actually, before I dive into this big theme of how our neurology develops and how our neurology really informs so much, I think this is a good moment for us to take a tiny little pause, to walk around your chair, get up, stretch, do whatever you need to do, just so that you're not gonna get out of the chair at noon and need somebody to help you straighten up. So take a couple of minute break, everyone, and we'll be back in, let's say, how about 3 minutes? Is that long enough? 3 minutes. Okay, so this, welcome back, everyone. This is the other handout I wanted to give you because I think it's really important that we understand how the brain works. And I think it's a really often overlooked piece of all of this. And even in Waldorf early childhood world where some of us live, I think it doesn't get enough attention. It's not the whole story. We have to understand it's not the whole story, but it is definitely part of a story that we need to understand and be able to tell. Now, when we're born, we have a super large head. All human beings are born with a very large head. And it's said that we grow from our head down. And physically, it looks like that because, of course, when we're born, the head is very large. And for infancy, the head is very large. And it looks like it's a challenge. It makes it be a challenge for the young child because the head is so large. As the child gets older and starts to be mobile, then we see that that large head is a challenge. It's a physics problem to be overcome. When you have such a large head, you you have to figure out how to move around with that large weight at the top of your body. So you see that the early stages of walking for the young child involve large head and large trunk. And that's what you think of as a toddler. A toddler means they toddle around because they have short legs. Their trunk has grown, and in the sort of the last part of early childhood, you see a lengthening of their limbs. You see a large growth spurt in their arms and legs. And we all know this sort of silly thing to see if they've had that growth spurt. You reach over the top of your head and see if you can touch your ear on the other side. And all of us can do that. And and some of us are trying it right now. And a 3-year-old can't possibly do it. Just physically impossible because their limbs haven't grown. Now, I was talking about life forces a few minutes ago. It's a really fascinating and amazing thing. Like, how can we learn how to see this? How can we learn how to see something that's invisible? And this is one way we can see the activity of the life forces in the developing child. And you could see that the places of most growth are where the life forces are most active. So you see in the infant, the life forces are most active in the head. And as they get a little older, 2 years old, 3 years old, the life forces now are more active in the trunk area, and their heart and lungs and liver and kidney are having massive growth, not only in the size of those organs, but also in how those organs function. Um, when the child's born, it isn't that all of their organs function like an adult. They're not born with mature organs. And one of the ways that they're not mature is in their relationship to each other. They don't function well as a team at birth. And part of the years of childhood are a kind of a rhythmicizing, you could say, of their organs so that the organs learn how to work together. Like, well, just think about the breathing for one thing. And the breathing and the heartbeat have a relationship. And in us, we approximately have 4 heartbeats per breath, give or take. But in the young child, there's no consistent pattern of heartbeat and breath. And in fact, so many parents of young children, of babies in the crib, listen in to their baby in the crib, and the adult's heart stops because it seems like the baby's not breathing. And it isn't because the baby has sleep apnea. It's because the baby hasn't yet developed a consistent pattern of their own breathing. So it takes until about 9 years old, for the breathing and the heartbeat to develop that consistent relationship pattern that human being, that developing human being will have. It takes a long time. I'm not even sure how long it takes for your liver and your gall to develop their sort of tag team relationship, that they have about a 12-hour cycle where your liver is active for 12 hours or so, and then your gall takes over for the next 12 hours. And in adults, the handoff is about 3 in the afternoon and 3 in the morning. That's why people say, oh, you should have all your protein well before 6 o'clock in the evening so that you can digest it. So your organs are prepared to digest it. But that is not functioning in the young child. That is something that has to develop over time. So you look at it, the child, and you see the areas where the big developing is happening. The first couple of years, it's in the head. The neurology is having a massive development at that time. Then from say 2, 3 to 5-ish, the trunk is having the development, those organs in the thoracic cavity, and the kidneys and the liver. And then 5, 6, 7 years old, we're having limb development, but also the metabolic system or the digestive system is really having its development, so that you can look from the outside and you can see how the etheric forces are working, how the chi is forming the physical body, how the prana is active in the body, how the forming life forces are at work. Now, and you can see that it coincides with that old adage that children grow from the head down, as opposed to this experience of self, which has a whole other way of developing. You could say that the experience of self and other, or your own experience of you as self, develops from the periphery, from outside of you towards the center of you. It's something that develops over time from the periphery towards your center, whereas the physical growth is from the head downward to the earth. And these two kind of different movements are something to think about, because they work together, or they're working not necessarily as a team, but they're two movement patterns, you could say, that are functioning in the child as they develop. Now at birth, we have a pretty mature brainstem. We have the child is able to receive sense impressions, or sense experience can be delivered to the brain at birth. So children can hear, children can taste, newborns can smell, they can see, they can hear. All of those basic senses are active at birth, which means that the organs that do the sensing, so the ear and the eye and the nose and the taste buds on the tongue, and the touch receptors on the skin, actually also the warmth receptors just below the skin, and the receptors on the organs that say when something is amiss or not. All of that, all of the sense organ part is active at birth, and the brain is ready to receive the signals that those organs send. But what isn't active at birth is the neurology that connects that sense information to each other, to concepts, to names, to anything. All that is functional in the brain at birth, besides the automatic systems like making the heart continue to beat and the breath continue to breathe, Those things are functional, and I'm not talking about those. But what the sense information that comes to the brain has nowhere to go, basically. It comes in as these perceptions, but there's no connection. There's no synthesis of this information. I like to think of sense experience as information. It makes it easier for my mind to process it, that idea. So this information is coming to the brain, but it's just like pure information. It doesn't have any connection. It doesn't even have name attached to it. And naming is a part of human development that we'll get to in a little bit. But as the child has more and more experiences, they begin to make connections. Pathways between parts of the brain are formed that allow there to be the beginnings of cognitive activity. And this development of pathways is accompanied by a myelination of these pathways, or in other words, it's like a wiring is happening, but it's not only the wire, that's the pathway itself, but the wire is covered with insulation, and the insulation is made out of fat, and that's called myelin sheath. And that's a part of the development of the brain. Repeated activities are very much supportive of the development of pathways and the strengthening of these pathways by myelinating them. But I want to talk about this page that I put up. Now, this page is talking about these three sections, three systems of the brain. And for me, discovering this way of thinking about the brain really has helped me and really guided a lot of my thinking about young children. And it's called the Triune Brain. And this thinking was developed by a man named Paul MacLean. He worked at the National Institutes of Health a long time ago. And he looked at brain function and separated it into three main systems. And the one system, well, let's have a different page here. Let me give you a different page to look at. The one system you could call the reptile brain. And the reptile brain, is this right? Is this showing? Yeah. The reptile brain, it matures pretty much completely mature by 2 years old. So think about that. When you're thinking about young children, you can understand the part of their brain that functions for survival, that is focused on when it's hungry or needing food, and defensive activity. That part of the brain is pretty much fully done at 2 years old. And that part of the brain is most especially tuned into the present moment. If you care, this part of the brain is basically the brain stem, and includes the midbrain and the basal ganglia. But you could think of it mainly as the brain stem. And after I talk about these three systems, I'll show you a kind of a cool way to remember these three systems. So that's the reptile brain. It really has to do with fight, flight, and freeze, because the reptile brain is the first part, or the first neurology to develop on Earth millions of years ago, and it evolved by being good at survival. So those brains that could survive were the brains that lived, and they passed on their genetics to other of their species, and that's been passed on down to us millions of years later. So this reptile brain is what enables us if someone threw something and it was aiming at you, it was heading right towards you, you wouldn't have to think about it and decide what you want to be doing. You would simply react and do something to block the thing that was coming towards you. That's embedded in the reptile system of our brain. It protects us. It allows us to defend ourselves. It allows us to make instantaneous decision whether we should fight with some perceived threat, or if we should run away from the perceived threat, or if we should just freeze in hopes that the perceived threat goes away. Now, this is the fastest part of the human brain. It functions at just hundreds of times faster than all of the rest of the systems of our brain, which is good for survival and a challenge for us not being ruled by this part of our brain. The second system in this triune brain is usually called the mammal brain or the limbic system. And it has to do with where our emotions live, where learning can take place, where memory is, where some of our instinct lives, but especially our habits, where the playful part of being human lives, just like in many animals. It's the amygdala, you could say, is the core of this part of our brain, but the hippocampus is in on it, the hypothalamus. This part of our brain isn't mature until about 7 years old. So this is something to keep in mind. The part of the brain where emotions and learning and memory and habits, that part of the brain matures at about 7 years old. Now there's another part of our brain, and that's the most evolved, meaning it's the newest part of neurology, of brain on Earth to evolve. And where did it evolve? It evolved in the primates, and it evolved especially in human beings. And what this part of the brain, this new evolutionary step in neurology, allows for is what we call executive function, which means the ability to understand things, which means the ability to get the logic of things, or to see if something is not logical. It's where we can have the ability to think about ourselves. It's the ability or the capacity for self-awareness. It's where we have the possibility of focusing our attention on something or not. The capacity for focusing attention that we often demand of young children is something that is only possible when we have a functional prefrontal cortex. The ability to wait to get what you want, the ability to really to have rational thought, rational thinking comes with the prefrontal cortex. Other people call it the neo-mammalian brain or the neocortex. But when is that mature is a very interesting question. It is present at birth, and it develops as we get older, and some of its functioning becomes more and more available to us, but it isn't fully mature until we're in our late 20s. So this possibility for what we call executive functioning, for putting our attention on a certain thing, for having self-awareness, self-restraint, self-reflection, for really understanding things isn't possible until we're much older than early childhood. And this is just such an important thing. I'm just going to keep saying this. Young children do not have access to executive function, and we can't expect them to. So when you try over and over to explain something that the child did that you didn't want them to do, and why it was a wrong thing to do and not appropriate and all that other stuff that you might want to try to keep talking to them to get them to understand, they can't. Their neurology isn't ready for that sort of conceptual digestion and understanding. Their prefrontal cortex won't be mature until they're in their late 20s. It doesn't mean teenagers can't understand things, but it does mean that they don't fully have access to these functions of the brain yet. Now, I just want to briefly say, because I'm going to come back to this in a little while, we have to think also how there's basic human needs that drive our behaviors. And some of these needs are really connected to functioning of the neurological systems, of the triune brain systems. And the reptile brain is always looking for safety, or is always wanting safety, you could say, because the reptile brain is always looking for threat in the world around us. It's always looking for what's wrong because it needs to keep us safe. It wants us to be safe. The limbic system, this sort of emotional learning system of the human being, is always longing for that feeling of contentment and satisfaction, and that, everything is okay, everything is good. Like the cat lying in the sun on a warm day with no dogs around. Everything feels good. And our prefrontal cortex is looking for connection. It's looking for love. That's when it most is in its sort of ideal milieu, is when it is in this web of connection, because that is the part of the brain that's able to really fully see and experience connection. So I think it's really important to think about this from so many angles, because how many times have you heard other people, let's say it's other people, say to the children, well, look, I already told you once, or even I told you 100 times. It doesn't matter how many times you tell someone something who doesn't really have a prefrontal cortex available to analyze their own behaviors and implement a change. It's just not a neurological capacity that's present in young children. I often joke that it would be a really great thing if we could tattoo on everybody, on the inside of everybody's eyelids, young children don't have prefrontal cortex, so that when you watch them do something and you are ready to pounce, you'll remember. So if there's some way you can remember this is just such a crucial thing for everyone who's around young children to keep in mind, that their prefrontal cortex is very developed, they as the adult. And the young child's prefrontal cortex is very much not developed. Maybe that could be a mantra that people could repeat to themselves, and have parent meetings, and the two parents of a child could say this to each other in the morning and before bed. Our child does not yet have a functional prefrontal cortex. The assistant and the kindergarten teacher in the morning can say that. Remember, their prefrontal cortex is really sleeping still, because it is. And if we only changed one thing in our outlook on young children, if we only changed that, it would make a world of difference for the children and for us, because then we could look for other ways to modify behaviors, to create situations different from the ones that are happening that we don't like. Yeah, I'll stop there for a second. I could go on for a long time with this, because and there's a lot to cover, so I want to get to a couple other things. Now, I mentioned the will before as one of the three functional faculties of a human being. The will is how young children take hold of the world. The thinking is how older people take hold of the world. And now you can see that it's connected to this neurological development, because When we're older, our prefrontal cortex has developed more. And so we're what's made available to us are things that tend to live in our inner life, in our life of thinking, like self-reflection and self-awareness and understanding and deciding where to put our focus. Those things are some things that come later in life, but in the young child, they are simply doing. And what is the motivation for their doing, though? If they're not thinking so much, then why are they into movement? Why are they doing? And it's a really interesting thing to think about. And if we think about the development of three critical parts of human um, life, we can think about that human beings, in a way, what makes human beings unique is that human beings move in a certain way. So let's just call that walking. Human beings have walking, meaning our bodies are upright and we are only having two of our limbs in direct connection to the earth. So human beings have a way that they walk. Human beings communicate with each other through a verbal or through a sound, in a series of symbolic sounds, which we call words, which are speaking. So human beings speak to each other, and many species of creature on Earth speak to each other. But so humans walk in a certain way, speak in a certain way, and then human beings have this different, based on the evolution of neurology, a different way of thinking than many other species on Earth. Surely human beings are more self-reflective than all other species on Earth and are more able to decide to change their behaviors. Not that we do it, but we're able to. It's a capacity that's available to us. And it's made possible by the appearance of the prefrontal cortex. So let's look at these activities for a second. Learning to walk, or developing the capacity of walking. How does that happen? Because we don't have the instinct for it. Human beings don't have a built-in mechanism that leads to walking. You know, if you were a dog, if you were a horse, and you were a newborn dog or horse, you would quickly be able to walk like a dog or a horse. And you wouldn't need another horse to teach you how to walk like a horse. You're born with the ability to move like your species, but not human beings. A human being only develops walking like a human being by copying other human beings who are doing that. In fact, we copy it so strongly that we copy the mannerism of moving the way that the ones that were our example for walking. And I often tell this story that people, when I was younger, people used to tell me that I walked the way my mom walks, or the way my mom walked. She's now late. And I disputed it. I denied it. I resisted it. I could not accept that because I watched my mom walk and I didn't think that was like the smoothest way to walk. And one day I was walking with my mom and we were in a small village in the US with very shiny windows. And I looked up at these shiny windows that we were walking toward, and I wondered who those people were who were walking just like each other. And then it dawned on me. So clearly my mom was my main walking teacher, because I walked exactly like her, at least that day. And I'm sure to this day, I walk the way my mom walked. So we need the example of human beings moving for us to take up moving in the human style. Also, we need to learn to speak. We need human beings speaking. We're not listening to human beings speak and deciding that we're going to copy them. It's fully an unconscious motivation to copy. It's not a thought out activity. If someone had thinking when they were 1 year old, and there they were watching other people move. That looks good. I think, yeah, I'd like to be able to move like that. And then they're up now, they're holding on to something. They've made it that far. And then they would think, if I let go, I'm going to fall. So I'm not gonna. That if you are thinking, the risks are too present in your thinking. The only way you would do it is if it's a drive somewhere hidden under the level of consciousness that you just do it. Now, there's a neurological aspect to the copying, the imitation that young children do, and we have it too. There's a part of our neurology that are known as mirror neurons. And in young children, they see someone doing something and they are compelled by their neurology to try it out. That's what mirror neurons do. They give us the they give us the intention, but it's not conscious. They give us the motivation to do what someone else is doing, to try to be in another person's shoes in the activity that they are engaged in. And when it's somebody doing something with some sort of intention or sense of purpose, then a young child is more driven to imitate them. And kindergarten teachers and parents, think about that too. If the things that you're doing have a purpose, the children are more prone to imitate. So we as adults also have mirror neurons, and we also have the prefrontal cortex, which gives us the ability to prevent our full body engagement with what the mirror neurons are telling us to do. And young children can't turn the off switch on the mirror neurons information. Adults can. But so, for instance, while I'm speaking, even over the internet, or when you're in the presence of someone speaking and you receive their speaking in your ears, your larynx is engaged in movement that is in resonance with the speaking that the other person is doing. We don't only hear with our ears, actually. Our vocal apparatus is engaged in our hearing, but as adults, most adults can shut it off. Some adults, those adults that finish your sentences along with you, they don't fully shut that off. So the mirror neurons are busy. And they're always busy, but we have the possibility of saying no to them. But it's not a conscious saying no. It's just a neurological off switch that we have developed. So in the learning to speak, which is by imitation, because we experience the repetition of adults saying the name of stuff. Now, what's so fascinating to me is the name of the stuff is really not the stuff. So, for instance, a chair. The word chair is not a thing that you can sit on, that lifts you up off of the ground, that supports your back possibly, that your legs hang down from and reach the floor. That is a thing, but the word chair is only a symbol for that thing. But if everyone closed their eyes, you don't have to do this. You can just, if everyone closed their eyes and someone says the word chair, we each have an inner picture of chair. Maybe they're a little different from each other, but we all have something that is more or less, chairness in our inner life. And it's not inherent in the word chair, though. It's something that only develops from a group of people agreeing that the collection of sounds ch, signify that thing that you sit on that lifts you up off the ground, that your back can lean on and your feet dangle down from to touch the floor. So it's a social agreement that those sounds symbolize the thing. But once we've kind of reached that agreement, then when someone makes that collection of sounds, an inner image arises in us. Now, in a child who hasn't yet learned language, and you say chair to them, it's nothing. It's just some sounds, like all the other sounds that they are surrounded by. So the first sort of developing towards speaking is that the child starts to discern in their sense of hearing which are sounds of people speaking and which are all the other sounds. We start to discern speech sound from not speech sound. You know, if you grew up in different parts of the world, you would have a different kind of vocabulary of speech sound, for instance. In the English-speaking world, we have a certain vocabulary of speech sound. In other languages, there's other sounds that are speech sounds that in English don't necessarily sound like speech sounds. But where you're born, it definitely relates to the things that you develop a discernment for as speech sounds. And then you start noticing that the adults are repeatedly using a collection of certain sounds in reference to certain objects. And the first words are always things, not feelings, not activities, but the first words are always things, names for things. And so you hear a group of adults, you know, or numerous adults, or even same adult repeatedly making the same sound while pointing to a certain thing, or while holding and showing a certain thing. And then as it goes on, when you hear those sounds, you as a little child start to be able to make the inner picture. And that conversion process, you could say, that translation of noise, these sounds as noise, to inner picture, this conversion of sound into picture, or this conversion of symbol into image, is a function of our prefrontal cortex. That's where that happens. And so as the child is learning speaking, or as the child is learning naming of things, they are stimulating the development of the neural pathways in their prefrontal cortex. So it's an essential process and a natural process that happens in humans. Now, an interesting thing, as an aside, about senses, our sense of sight is directly plugged in to our reptile system, our reptile neurology, so that hearing is kind of a secondary sense for the reptile brain. So if, let's say, you think you want your child to have some sort of a nice learning experience, and you put them in front of a screen where they're teaching things, whatever it is, there's a problem that we rarely recognize in this. And the problem is that the child's prefrontal cortex is not getting exercised, because the visual stimulus, I'm sorry, I'm going to use this word, the visual stimulus trumps the auditory stimulus. The visual stimulus is primary and it goes into the reptile system. So when we're doing something for the young children where we're offering, an already made image with sound, we should realize that the prefrontal cortex is not getting its necessary exercise. So this speaking develops as a first ability to create inner images. And then when we have a sort of vocabulary of the symbols, a vocabulary of sound, which we call words, then you begin to put them together and you can have thought. Thought only can develop when we have vocabulary. And it can develop in people who speak. And then it's usually how we think is in words. Most people think in words. But some people didn't develop the capacity for speaking or for hearing. And so they develop a vocabulary of movement patterns. And still they are able to think because they have these symbols. The thinking is founded on symbolic creation of inner images. So these three things, walking, speaking, and thinking, are very important that we develop, but they develop out of this unconscious will activity, which we name imitation. And imitation cannot be underestimated as an important tool, as the most important tool of relating to young children. Now, I think it's the last territory I want to go into with you has to do with needs and trust. Let's see if I can find this. Uh-oh. Well, maybe I can't find it right now. Let's see. Did that. Sorry. Okay, I give up on it. So when we think about young children, think about this process of coming to Earth and deciding to go to school on Earth. I don't mean enrolling in a program. I mean deciding to be born, deciding to take your perfect spiritual essence from the world of warmth and joy and deciding to be born into the challenging learning schooling of physical life on Earth, a spiritual being as human, a spiritual being having a ride as a human being in a physical body. We come from this place where you could say that the part of the foundation of the spiritual world is trust. There's just a complete trust, all beings trusting all beings because it's all warmth and joy. And then we're born and the young child wants to experience that trust in the world. And you could say that part of the child already knows that there's going to be challenges on the horizon. That's sort of part of this choice of incarnation. Another word for that is karma. Part of it is we're going to have things to work on in our lifetime. So part of it, though, is that we have this expectation for trust. And once we're born and we see that we can't fully surrender to trust because we have experiences that teach us that it isn't always that we get what we need when we need it. And it's not through any maliciousness or failure of our parents. It's just that we have needs and there are competing needs in life. So let's say a hungry child maybe is hungry a few extra minutes because the adult was unavailable to offer the food at that time. But for the child, that any possible reason is irrelevant. They didn't get what they needed when they wanted it. So as time goes on, trust becomes, a question more than a given. And trust in the world is an important thing for us to develop or to provide, because as an adult, it's up to you to meet your needs. I'm sorry, I don't know if you know this or not, but you're the only one that can meet your needs. No one can meet your needs for you. But for an infant, they cannot meet their needs. It's not possible. They are relying on their caring adults to meet those needs. So the most basic needs that children have, I mentioned before, one need is this feeling of being safe, knowing that we won't be attacked. We all want to feel that feeling, but infants need that feeling. Babies, young children need that feeling of feeling safe. We also want to feel that our sort of physical needs are satisfied, and that we just have this kind of feeling of contentment, that the world is satisfying. The world gives us what we need. And also, we need to feel loved. We need to feel connection. We need to feel, accepted and heard and understood. Connection, love. Those basic needs are what deliver trust, you could say. When someone feels safe and satisfied and connected, then you can begin to feel trust with someone. Now, that's one way to think about it. That's sort of a way to think about it from this threefold brain, this triune brain way to think about it. And if you really want to go into this, there's a couple of people I suggest you could read more of what they've written. One is Rick Hanson. Rick Hanson is an amazing sort of Buddhist teacher / neuro researcher. And he really focuses on these three needs: safety, satisfaction, and connection. And then another suggested reading I offer is a guy named David Richo. He's written a couple of books of how to be an adult. I think that's literally the title of one of his books. And he focuses, instead of those three needs, he looks at 5 needs that we all have. And that when you're an infant or a child, they need to be delivered to you. But as an adult, you need to moderate those needs yourself. And the thing is, though, David Richo points out something really interesting. If those 5 needs aren't delivered when you're a child, as an adult, you have sort of certain gaps, certain holes in your own soul that you're constantly trying to fill, but you never feel that they get fulfilled unless you do something really to radically change your psyche, counseling or some kind of way to really change that feeling that you can't get enough of whatever it is. And the 5 needs that David Richo speaks about conveniently all begin with the letter A. So it's sort of easy to remember them. And they are attention. Everybody needs attention. Acceptance. So not like, oh, you're welcomed here, but who you are as a human being is accepted. Also, that there's appreciation. In other words, that you are valued. Also, that we receive affection, physical affection, not sexual affection, but physical affection, touch, care, caressing, stimulation of oxytocin, that kind of affection, physical touch, and autonomy. So some degree of independence that fits right with the development of the child, not that you are the commander of every little aspect of their life. And if these are fulfilled, now, so this is scary in a way, because you think, oh no, what if I don't do this all the time? And I'm surely not able to do this all the time. And that's okay, because if they're fulfilled in a good enough way most of the time, then the child can have this kind of feeling of completeness, and they have a capacity for being satisfied. So in a good enough way most of the time, that's how trust develops. And it's a necessary thing, but we have to really sometimes, because adults tend to live in their intellects, and adults in 2020 probably live more in their intellect than adults 100 years ago or 500 years ago. So we're really in an intellectual world, and I think it helps to really to dissect things and really look at it. And then when we put it back together, it can become more of a, a foundation that we don't have to think about all the time, but we can be aware. Because the thing is, everybody is driven by needs. You could say, and Marshall Rosenberg said, if any of you know who he was, the guy that started a communication structure, you could say, or framework called nonviolent communication, NVC, or it's also called compassionate communication sometimes. He described that all human actions are motivated by needs. Either we're attempting to fulfill our need, or we're acting because the need is not being fulfilled. So if you're not feeling safe, we all have our techniques for dealing with that. If you're not feeling if you're not feeling connection, you have a technique for doing that. And as David Rico says, if as a young child those needs weren't met in you, then you have a hole in you that you are motivated to always try and fill. You never feel enough love, no matter what. Your partner doesn't love you enough. The world doesn't appreciate you. Whatever it is, you don't feel that need is ever satisfied. You have a deep hole that can't be filled. And so as adults, we have to understand, well, we don't have to, but we could understand that our needs can be moderated by us, and we can see, yes, this person who isn't showing love for me right now, there's other things going on, and I can understand that, and I can deal with it because I know that they're most of the time my needs are being fulfilled in a good enough way. So as adults, we can do that, but as children, they need us to really be looking out for the fulfillment of their needs. So how do children learn all this stuff of life? There's one word for it, and the word is play. And that we have to give the children immense opportunity for play. We have to really give them time for play, because play is how they learn everything. And even as an infant, when they first start picking up a pan and banging it on the ground, and we, well, however you respond to that, that's up to you. But they're playing, they're discovering how the world works. And when the 6-year-olds, you be the prince and I'll be the princess, and you be the this, and we'll play that, they're still discovering how the world works, though they not only discovering the physical world anymore, now they're entering into discoveries of the social world. Play is so essential. Play is the thing. Play develops all the this is a funny thing. The neurological researchers of children have discovered something fascinating that unfortunately hasn't been included in many curriculums around the world, which is that play is the activity that most stimulates the most diverse portions of the brain. It's the only activity that stimulates as many parts of the brain as it does. Play makes firing happen in so many systems and parts of our brain. It's just, it's a shame that it isn't thought of as the key to early childhood education. Another key for us in thinking about young children is our attitude around the young children. And I don't mean about them, I mean, how are we as a human being feeling about the world? If we are a depressed person, then I suggest it's our responsibility to undepress for the sake of the children. The children literally need us to surround them with joy. Not that we're happy all the time. That's not what joy is. But joy is being able to appreciate the beauty of the tree, being able to enjoy being with each other, being able to realize that there's challenges in life and that we can learn from them. Doesn't mean that we like those experiences of challenge, but we can joyfully embrace them because we will become a better human being out of it. Yeah, the last thing I want to do, and then we'll leave a couple of minutes for if there's questions, because I know I talked fast for these past almost 2 hours. I just want to show you something I learned from this guy named Dan Siegel, who's written a few really cool books about the mind and about consciousness. And so if you everybody take one arm, it doesn't have to be right or left. So now you have your forearm goes up into your hand. Now pretend that we're looking at the brain now. Pretend we're talking about the brain. This is the brain stem going up into the rest of the brain. This is, and into the palm of your hand, let's say. This is the reptile brain. There it is. Now, if you fold your thumb in like this, you have your limbic system sitting on top of your reptile brain. This is more or less a way, the way that your brain really is, but we would have to do it like this to be really accurate. But so we're doing a one-handed brain image here. So here's the brain stem, the reptile system. Here is the limbic system. Now fold your fingers over, and there you have the prefrontal cortex. Now this is the problem of being a human being. The reptile system is super strong and fast, and the limbic system is where a lot of habits live. And the prefrontal cortex is where reflective thought happens. You can just already feel it's a slower process. It's not like, so when something happens that stimulates you or a child or anyone, something happens that stimulates your core needs, like your need for safety, for instance. What happens is your prefrontal cortex goes unavailable. Dan Siegel described it as you flip your lid. You lose access to your prefrontal cortex and you're left with your fight, flight, and your habits. And it's a really scary and real thing. That's how our brains work. We want access to this newest, fastest, not fastest, the newest development of our neurology, where all the bells and whistles live. If you wanted to think about it, the part of your prefrontal cortex, okay, prefrontal cortex means it's the front part of your brain, the outer front part of your brain. So on the sides, the front sides, that part of your brain is where, so if we're doing the hand, this part of your brain is where you have the possibility of focusing your attention. The more central parts is where you have the rationalization part, or rational abilities and reflection and all that other stuff. So when you're telling a young child to pay attention, I'm talking to you. Like this isn't ready yet. It's not ready yet. Another piece I just want to bring, and then next time in January, I want to sort of do part 2, where we can take these 5 ways of thinking, 5 principles, and apply it to what happens when things don't go the way we want them to go. How do we deal with it? When the children don't do what we want them to do. So when you have your prefrontal cortex, you have your limbic system, and you have your reptile system, all functioning all the time. And then you have your child, and they have all that stuff, only their prefrontal cortex isn't really available yet. And so the child does something, and your brain analyzes everything all the time, and it sees something that happened, and it decides that that's not safe. Maybe it's not safe for the child, or it's not safe for you if the child is doing that. Let's just pretend. So what happens is your neurology is stimulated, your prefrontal cortex is gone, because this is a button for you. Your button has been pressed. You're triggered. Your double comes into the game here. But your prefrontal cortex is on vacation now. And you approach the child, and you're approaching the child without your prefrontal cortex, you could say. So you are the bear, you are the monster that is coming towards your child, because the child, without your prefrontal cortex to be part of this, the child did something wrong, and they need to be corrected or punished or something. And the child, whom you want to learn something, to be able to do something different, feels the approach of a threatening monster. And I'm not exaggerating. When you lose it, or even when you're scolding, even when you're come to the child like this, or hands on the hips, or tapping your foot, looking at them, or even just looking at them judgmentally, they decipher you as a threatening monster. And so they are instantly in their reptile brain neurology trying to assess, should I run or should I freeze? Because probably they don't want to fight with you. You're much too big at age 5 or 4 or 2 or 6. And so we have to break that pattern. In a way, it's the problem of our human world. And we can only do it one by one. We have to stop deciding that somebody is bad or wrong and that we need to do something about it without having it processed it through our prefrontal cortex. We're just living on our triggers. And we don't even see that the child's behavior is their strategy for getting needs met. I mean, we all have our strategies for getting needs met, and that's what becomes our habits. And the child is having a habit functioning that started out as a strategy to get what they need. And the other thing we often forget is that especially if we're the parents, we participated in the creation of that strategy, of that habit. Why does a child whine? They whine because it works. They whine because they discovered that whining gets them what they want most of the time. So in a way, don't be annoyed with your child for whining. Look in the mirror if you want someone to be annoyed with. So I just want to kind of give you this picture of this dynamic of what happens when we lose connection to our prefrontal cortex, but yet we are hoping, or our intention is for the child to change behavior. But we're creating a situation where the child can't change behavior because the reptile brain isn't where they learn. The reptile brain is only about defense. The limbic system is where they learn, but they can't access the limbic system if they're being threatened. And scolding, judging, a threatening, literal threatening, yelling, that's all threat. There's a whole, like a spectrum of threat / punishment, and all of it is first possibly going to be imitated, and in fact very likely going to be imitated, and second, not going to create the change that you wish it would, because learning happens when the child has the possibility of imitating something. So you're giving them something to imitate, but it's, if you thought about it, it's probably not what you were wanting them to imitate. So I'm going to stop and see, we'll unmute everyone, but only let's try to speak one at a time. I know that's not, it's not easy since we can't see all each other at once, but I think you can unmute if you would like to speak, if you would like to ask anything. There we go.
So, Stephen, I have a question, or just more asking for clarification. When you speak of visual stimulus as more powerful or stronger than the auditory?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's stronger necessarily, but it takes precedence. It, like if you're hearing and seeing something, the first sort of reception of the seeing and hearing information happens in your reptile brain, because your reptile brain, it functions faster, because you need, for survival, you need to know if there's something dangerous. You need to see if something is dangerous.
So, how might that relate to our days since March and COVID-19? And
Having young children on computers sucks.
yeah.
It's not good for their development. It's not good for our development either. But it's also not good if people die from COVID-19. So we're in a challenging situation, and when will this be over? I have no idea. Hopefully not too long. Certainly over the next month or two, it's not going to be good. And for, I know a lot of schools that were in person and now are considering not being in person for at least, till into January, because of the sharing of a virus that will likely be happening. So that's a challenge. I know there's a lot of views and opinions about that, and I know that schools are ideally being cautious, because it would be, you can't feel bad if you had a major spreading event at your school. So, I know that there's some early childhood people that are not offering video stuff with their children. They're doing audio only. So then the children have to create their own inner images. I know other programs where they're not offering anything directly for the children. They're offering guidance for the adults. So, and I know many schools where, because they're like public schools, often have a requirement on them to, kindergartners 4 hours in front of the screen every day. I personally can't imagine that. I don't want to imagine that. But humans are resilient too, and this will be over, and we'll bounce back. The ones that I'm the most sort of worried about, in a way, are the ones who would be in, depending on when high school starts in your area, either 7th or 8th grade is the last year before high school. Those children I have a sort of a more worry about, and also high school seniors. Those who it's like the various kinds of culmination for them, those are it's harder for them to bounce back, I think. The kindergartners, I'm not worried about them. I mean, if they have to sit in front of the screen 6 hours a day and, and there's no end in sight, that's a worry. And there will be some transition back to non-screen life. And it will be hard. The hardest thing in that situation, I think, will be for the families to justify to their children that they aren't going to have screen for the children now. We did it when we had to stay at home for school, but now we don't do that anymore. That's going to be a hard sell. And so then the children's strategies will kick in to see how they can get what they want, because it's enticing. It has a lot of the screen has a lot of draw, let's just say.
Can I comment a little bit?
Yes, please.
I think that, on the one hand, what you've presented today is a wonderful picture of the foundation of what we as Waldorf educators really want to be holding and bearing in mind as we consider our work with the children and our work with humanity. And I feel that this whole situation with COVID has asked us to move beyond that and to really take up the question of what our world is becoming, what our world is going through, and what our world is becoming. And the fact that these children have chosen this experience to come in at this very, very peculiar time in the history of humanity. And so I think that our challenge is, on the one hand, to hold the ideal and to hold these pictures, these very fundamental pictures, but on the other hand, to ask the broader question of what am I being asked to do now in this situation for these children and these families, and to find ways to meet just the bizarre times that we live in.
I think that's always the question, actually.
Yeah.
And when we fall asleep and just do what we did last year or do what the person who trained us did, then we're actually not serving the children. That we really have to, really be awake. But also as parents, what worked yesterday might not work today. What our parents did,
For sure.
we might not want to repeat. I think the whole part of the whole purpose of living is to digest the experiences that you have received, digest the gifts that you've received from your parents, from your mentors, whether or not they thought of themselves as mentors, the guy at the grocery store, the librarian, whatever, all of the people that really participated in our becoming in this lifetime and other lifetimes too, if that's part of your worldview, that all of that is the kind of collection of tools that we have received, and how we digest it and the choices that we make as we move forward is it. That's our purpose in a way. I think it's this is a time of year when, Thanksgiving in America. So it's worthwhile to think about, are there things that we receive that we can be grateful for, like to really acknowledge, or first to recognize that, yes, we're here because of the gifts of those who've gone before us or those who gave to us. And then to feel the gratitude for that, but also realize that we have to digest it, and it only can be ours when we take it through a process of digestion, really, of prefrontal cortex digestion, so that then we can determine how we utilize this. And that's what Steiner wanted us to do. Steiner never wanted people to be Steiner quoters. He wanted people to consider the things that he had said or had written, and to see how does it resonate for someone. And then the things that resonate, then you apply those in your vocation or in your life as a human being. And we're in a different situation than people have been for at least for 100 years, where there's this situation that's involving the whole world, which is like a disease situation. And so what do we do now? What do we do for the children who clearly some of their needs are being compromised right now? And will that create permanent damage? I don't think it will for the little children. And especially if, like you said, we see what can be done right now. I think also when teachers or anyone thinks that that we must not use electronic communication, period, as an ideal, as a more important ideal than the importance of connecting.
Yeah.
And so we really have to look at what are the needs, what are the ideals. And okay, so for me, connecting is super important. And I don't think it's um, it's I don't like the idea of screens for young children, but I less like the idea of no connecting. So I'm willing to compromise. But for instance, I didn't do video stuff with the little children. I only do audio. So I do a little more instructing in it though. So that's my compromise. I have like a radio show, and instead of just doing circle time, I'll say, okay, now reach your arms up into the sky and wiggle your fingers or whatever. I kind of have to, do a little explaining so they can do the things I want them to do. But that's a compromise I'm willing to make. So somebody asked, I said something a minute ago about the why grade 7 or 8 or high school being such an important time and why it's more challenging. It's because it's a culmination. It's like they're completing something and then moving on to their next stage of education, but they can't do it. They're not there to do it because in those two times, it's a very social thing. And it's not happening on Zoom. Those times in a child's life leading up to those sort of transition into high school or out into the world from high school are really big times of needing each other to go through it together. And that's what they don't have. Sadly, horribly sadly, there's been high school kids committing suicide due to the isolation of this pandemic situation. And that's part of the problem for those children or those young people.
I have a question that's maybe a little separate from COVID, and it might not even be appropriate for this topic, but
I love not thinking about COVID.
Guidance for when I really appreciate these 5 guiding principles for better understanding the world of your child. This was a very helpful diagram for my brain. Do you have words when you notice that one of those circles is maybe where you might anticipate a 3-year-old, and then another one of those circles is maybe where you anticipate a 9-year-old. And so maybe within this wacky COVID time, like we're home more, how do we work with our child to make the whole circle more round? I don't know if that's something you can speak to.
Well,
or if my question even makes sense.
I think that all of those circles are especially especially with the young child. They more apply to determining how we make choices of what the young child needs. That's how I think about this. These are tools for the adult to use as like a compass, an inner compass, so that we can determine what a child needs and how to sort of steer them towards what they need when it's not kind of working out the way it could. For instance, like let's just a quick example. There's a child that wants something and another child has it. So the child walks over and grabs a hold of the thing that the other child has and pulls harder than the child is able to hold on to it. So now that child has the object and that child is happy about having the object, and the other child not so happy about not having the object. So what do you do about that? So that's what this is for in my mind, to look at a situation and go, okay, so that neither of these children really has a well-developed prefrontal cortex. So explaining, that's not going to be a good idea. Neither of these children fully has this, really strong awake experience of self. So they know, but that one child knows I have this now, but not so aware that the other child doesn't have it. Even though adults think that they should be aware of that, they're actually probably not, because the child who went over and took the thing simply had a desire that they fulfilled. They didn't take into account the other person's needs or desires because they can't. Back to the neurological development circle. They can't. Their neurology is not available for abstract thinking. That kind of thinking that, you wish they could be empathetic and feel what it would be like to be in that child's shoes, but they can't. It's a neurological inability. And it's not that they have a personal handicap. It's just the way the brain develops. It's not there yet. So then you go, okay, so explaining to them or asking them how it might feel if someone did that to them, well, that's abstract thinking. So I'll cross that out. I'm not going to try that. So, well, how can we give them something different? So this, I'll show you what I do. I've done this a million times, probably at least by now in my life. I hold out my hand to the child that now has the object. And I'm not trying to take it away. If I come at that child to take it away, then I am a threatening monster. And the child will defend itself, will hold the thing tight, will throw the thing, or who knows what they'll do, but they will feel attacked. And if in my mind, I'm thinking that was bad, that was a wrong thing to do, that child shouldn't have done that. Like all of those thoughts are like attack, though just on a more minor level. So I want the child to be able to have their neurology relaxed so that I can offer something that they can, through their own will, take up. Their own will is the only road to learning for them, for anyone. So with a young child, how their will works especially is by imitating. So if I hold my hand like this, I'm offering the child a place to put the thing. And for adults, our hands are somewhat magnetic, especially if we're not making the child out to be bad, we're not judging them. We're just offering our hand so they can give it to us. And inside us, we understand, or we're confident that they're going to give it to us. We're not going to have a wrestling match with the child. The child hands you the thing and you hand it to the other child. And all you have to say is something like this: it's her turn now, and you can have a turn next. and not be mean or judgmental or whatever. Just state, as cleanly, calmly as you can. Offer your hand, give it to the other child. It's her turn now, and you can have a turn next. And now you've just given them something. You've given both of those children something that you would be super happy if they imitated. You've given them words that you would like them to imitate, in fact. And the one child, you hope, takes up this part of it. Can I have a turn next? And the other child, you hope, takes up the other part. It's my turn, and you can have a turn next. And it's shocking how well it works, but it might not work that day, and it might not work the next day, and it might not work if doing the same thing for a couple of weeks, but eventually it will work. Eventually one or the other of the children will start to imitate those words that you have put into their environment for them to imitate. So it means this, I'm drifting into what I want to talk about in January, but what it means is that you have to think before you open your mouth. And so you have to try to be able to say something in very few words that's right to the point. And actually, even before that, you have to find a way to not be judgmental, because already if we just inwardly are judgmental, then we've become the threatening monster. So we have to be able to see, okay, so this child's prefrontal cortex, not so developed. This child has needs or desires that they're trying to fulfill. And this is their habit. This is the habit that they use to get what they want. They walk over, grab stuff, and take it with them. And it's a successful habit. It works mostly. It works. So it doesn't make it a bad habit. In fact, you could say it's a good strategy because it worked. The thing is, the other child wasn't so happy about it. And as social beings, we want to help. We as the adults, sort of guiding a group of young children into their becoming human beings, we want to offer them strategies where needs of various people can be met, not just their own needs. So that's how I use these 5 circles, and in considering what I do. But I don't so much think about it anymore. And in a way, this is how I undigested the things that I do, or I dissected how I think about things to be able to come up with this. Because in some ways, after a while, it becomes natural. It just becomes how you function with young children. But until then, you have to very actively use your prefrontal cortex to engage these ways of thinking about young children. And this is the thing. You have a prefrontal cortex, so use it. The children don't have one, but you do. I mean, they have one, but it's just not functional. So take advantage. It's a tremendous gift that we have, and we can use it. We can do things to take conflicts out. We can move things around. You can put those things you don't want the children to play with in a shelf they can't reach, instead of having to yell at them when they try to get that stuff that you don't want them to touch. I mean, that's what a prefrontal cortex is for. You can create solutions to situations that don't involve making somebody bad and wrong. And that's what the beauty of those circles are for me. When I like us to develop a world where we're not shaming and blaming everyone, because those are hindrances for development. And then you're stuck with that stuff. And as adults, you have to go to counseling or something, and even sometimes it's still stuck with you. So you have to find ways to work through those things so that they aren't your motivations. They aren't your triggers and your own reaction patterns. You know, when we think about that children do certain things and we would like them to change, it's actually us. We have to look at us. You can't make someone else change. Sorry if that's sad news. You can't make someone else change. You can only change you. So, yeah, I hope today was helpful. And as I mentioned, I think at January 23rd or so, I'll have a second morning like this, or morning in California. I don't know where you all are, but it'll be more focused on, are there other ways of getting the children to do something different than what they're doing besides bribery or threatening? Those are easy techniques, but are those the best techniques? And, you know, because of imitation, is that what you want to offer as something for your child to imitate? So thank you all for being here. And I look forward to seeing you all in various circles and realms of life in the farther and nearer future. So have a great rest of your day.